All right, looks like we are live. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us for this important discussion tonight. As a mom, I know for myself, it's hard enough sending my kids out in the world. So this discussion is particularly important to me as a mom because I can't imagine how hard it is for moms who are worried that the color of their child's skin makes them less safe in the world. So as a mom, it's a very important discussion for me. But also, as a candidate for the state legislature, I really want to learn more about all of these issues and how policy can affect them, and address, specifically talking about addressing how policy can affect policing in communities and strengthen communities. So I appreciate both of you, Sheriff Ron Hain and community advocate Marcus Banner, for taking the time to join me tonight, and for your willingness to participate in a discussion that I know can be hard, but I know it's something that also means a lot to both of you. And what I know of both of you, I know that tackling systemic racism is something that you're both passionate about. So I would like you to introduce yourselves by sharing briefly with us what you do in your roles in the community to make a difference for the Black community in King County. Ron, do you want to start?
You want me to go first? How's my audio? So how do I sound?
You're good.
We had some issues in the first check, so I just want to make sure. So Sheriff Ron Hain, I've been sheriff of King County for a year and a half now, and that's on top of my 20-plus year career in law enforcement at the King County Sheriff's Office. So what's different in operating as a sheriff's deputy, a police officer, is as sheriff I have to wear two hats, and that's lost a lot of times on prosecutors and police officers in the community. The fact that I am supportive of safe streets. I am very supportive of my police officers and going out and eradicating crime, drugs, guns in the most ethical manner from our community. And then when they do come into my custody at the Kane County Jail, I have to put on a different hat. And that is to provide real correctional format for those people that are the most in need, the people that are most marginalized. And when I took over as sheriff, and I really had to invest in that second hat that I had never worn before, I was most taken aback by the fact that Kane County has a 6% Black population in the community. And my jail, when I took over as sheriff, was in the range of 40 to 46% Black. And that was alarming to me. And then it made me dive into why are they in my custody? And to find out that many of them were being held on nonviolent crime, mostly drug-related crime, on a very high bond based on their criminal history. That drove my desire to build in formative programming, which, truth be told, Marcus is one of our instructors in the jail in a mentorship program. Formative programming to try and correct their behavior and reenter them into the community in a positive format. So, the number one thing that we can do to drive down negative encounters between the community, whether you're Black, Latino, or white, is to not be involved in criminal activity. So my goal through that angle in the last year and a half is to give a hand up to those who need it the most, number one, and number two, rebuild the relationship between Black and Latino men and women with those who wear a uniform, specifically at the Sheriff's Office.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. Marcus, how about you?
My name is Marcus Banner, and I come to you as one people, one voice, one community. I'm a community advocate. I advocate a lot for our forgotten communities, which are the local communities who are generally overlooked, victimized, and pretty much stepped all over and used to build the careers of those in law enforcement. Think about what brought me when I first met him was he spoke in the beginning and becoming a sheriff, and when they went to go look for the bad guys were in all of the low-income minority communities. So as we're talking about type of changes, that type of culture where it starts. You bring guys in, and then you point to the Blacks and Browns as those are the bad guys. That's where you go to make arrests. Then you're already creating a problem.
All right, thank you. Thank you for your introductions. So we did actually ask people to submit questions beforehand, and I'm going to offer those questions up for discussion. And if you want to take turns answering, you can. If you want to banter a little bit back and forth on them, we can do that as well. So the first question we have addresses the question of defunding the police. So this writer says, defund the police may make a simple hashtag, but realistically, the movement begs us to analyze and scrutinize the budgeting of police departments. Are funds being used for military-grade weaponry or vehicles, for intrusive software applications, etc.? Or would funds be better suited for efforts, programs, community outreach, etc., intended to eliminate, reduce, or de-energize confrontations between law enforcers and the public?
So to me, I take defunding the police as not completely eliminating law enforcement, and I think agencies like Elgin Police Department has taken great steps in the direction of adding social workers to their staff, better training their law enforcement officers from everything from crisis intervention training to addiction support, domestic abuse support. And in my year and a half as sheriff, I've tried to model a lot of that training to expand the skill sets of our deputies, so they can better support all facets of the community. Because let's look at it this way, and I always think of when somebody says defund the police, eliminate the police department, one of the number one calls that we go to are domestic violence or domestic disputes. Mm-hmm. And that is also one of the top 3 ways that law enforcement officers are met with lethal force or killed in the line of duty, is intervening in a domestic dispute. So I hope the community agrees that we need someone to be able to immediately respond and intervene in a violent confrontation like that, the very unfortunate incident of a domestic dispute. But we also need those people who respond to not only create a safe atmosphere, number one, for everyone's safety involved, but number 2, be able to help everyone mitigate through that family environment and give them a support structure to come out better on the other side. And I think local law enforcement, I always say we have the luxury here in suburban Chicago of having very well-trained police officers to serve us. I think in the modern environment here in suburban Chicago, we're heading in that direction. But admittedly, we still have a long way to go to bring all staff members up to that performance level.
Well, for me, defunding, yeah, I see it. Police are definitely necessary when it comes to dealing with certain issues. The problem that we have is not when they're called. The problem is when they're bored and have nothing to do, and they go looking for arrests and they go looking for people to shake down. That's where the problems come from within our community. I'm 100% for investing in people instead of toys and bricks. I've always said if you invest in the people, help educate, give them the proper mindset, and then give them the tools necessary in order to have gainful employment, and then also give them the opportunity to have that gainful employment. A lot of programs fall short of giving people skills, and then they learn how to do something new, and then they're hungry and they want to do something different. They want to be a productive citizen. And then all of the doors are slammed in their faces through all of the people who are in charge of hiring based on their background. And that's so bad that people go through temporary agencies. They'll work at a place for 6 months, and they'll come and say, I love your work ethic. You're always here on time. You work very hard. We want to hire you on full time. And then that company will do a background check and fire them. Like, what sense does that make? This person's already proved their work ethics and that they can do the job and that they're good at the job. And then you'll look into their background, and for some drug case they had 5 years ago, you turn around and fire this individual. And it's like, those are the problems. So we should definitely invest in people, more money into the people, but then also, which Ron has been working on, is getting different companies and corporations to give people the opportunity to have good employment so they don't have to turn back to the streets.
Mm-hmm. Those are really good insights. I appreciate that. The next question that we have is, Chicago residents are pushing to establish a democratically elected council to oversee the Chicago Police Department. if enacted, the Civilian Police Accountability Council, CPAC, would allow citizens to have oversight of the police force by overseeing investigations of civilian complaints and police shootings, as well as internal investigations and procedures. This is a divisive time in America in which fear and mistrust has increased the likelihood of violence for civilians and police alike. Panelists, can you speak to the current accountability measures for police in Kane County and weigh in on the costs and benefits of increasing civilian oversight of our community police force?
So I'm going to toss this to Marcus because I know he's pushing for that change in the city of Elgin. So I'd like to hear his perspective. Circle on the county side.
Yeah, well, accountability is definitely the biggest thing. I always use the analogy of, anybody who's raised children understand how if you have a 2-year-old who starts swearing and saying bad words and you don't check it in the beginning, you laugh, right? It's cute. Then that 2-year-old becomes a 5-year-old. That 5-year-old becomes a 10-year-old. Then that 10-year-old becomes a 15-year-old. Now, at this point, this behavior has been going on unchecked. So now that 15-year-old starts feeling more bold enough to where now I'm going to choke you. Now I'm going to smack you. Now I'm going to put my knee on your neck until you can't breathe. Right? So accountability, if it's checked, the bad behaviors are checked in the beginning, then it can escalate to the point where officer feels like he's God and there's no accountability to him at all. Nothing's going to happen. If I kill this person, I get a paid vacation. And then I come back here and I'm a hero to all my fellow officers. The citizen oversight definitely has to have power. I know a lot of law enforcement, they'll say, oh, well, how are we going to train them? How are we going to do this? Are they going to understand this? They're going to understand that. So I think that's a cop-out for not having oversight, because the same people that you're saying that need all of this training and understanding are the same people that you have on the grand juries, right? They're the same people who reside over all of the trials that these officers are presenting cases for against citizens. And these people have plenty of knowledge and the power to say that person is guilty. But if they're going to be able to have the same power over the officer, now that's a problem. So that's what I don't like. But we definitely need that same power. We don't need to be trained. Life is our training, right? The things that we see, the way we have the understanding on how things work and how things move, what's right and wrong, right? You can't just say, oh, you got to have some special training. And to me, that's like you want to try to program the people who have oversight of you to think like you so that they can still be more leaning towards your side other than what's right and wrong.
And I'm nodding because I right before this started at 5 o'clock, Marcus, I started to go back and forth with Marcus about this, and I threw him my concerns to that point about, well, how are these people going to get educated? And you didn't have a chance to bring up the very valid point about a jury system. So do you have a model, Marcus, of what you want to see Elgin adapt? Is it a jury of 12? Is it 6 people? What does it look like in your mind for that town, for what you'd like to see?
Well, I definitely would like to see maybe 9, mostly people of color, right? The people who are mostly affected, people from working class people who have actually had encounters where you don't have to spend your life trying to get them to understand that these things really do happen. I think that most of society suffers from cognitive dissonance when it comes to law enforcement. Because once you say they did something wrong, they get it in their mind that, okay, well, if I say that officer's wrong, that means I'm anti-police. And it has nothing to do with being anti-police. You want to hold somebody accountable for their wrongdoing. So that's the big obstacle. But I definitely think that the people who are most affected by something should have the most oversight. I think that's only fair.
So you don't think that democratically elected, you never know what's going to come of it if it goes to that model. But you don't think that the panel should reflect the racial demographics of the community?
No, because how about the your statistics that you threw out there, right? 46% of us are in your county jail. So let's look at how many people the racial equity when it comes to those who are affected by the justice system, not of the community. And let's look at that model. So 46% of the population that's affected and constantly locked up through the justice system is Black. Well, then 46% of the council should be Black, and then break it down from there.
So I think that definitely argues to the idea of it being democratically elected, right, Martha? In that it has to be some sort of balance based on arrest data. You know, who is being brought into custody, who's having the most violent encounters by race, and try and come up with a formula for the best equality in the committee, and then who appoints that committee? Is it the city board? You know, where does that investment come from? Basically, what I'm getting at is I'm open to it as a government official. I have to listen, and it is my number one duty to listen to the people in the community, to listen to Marcus, and to hear his voice, and see the rage and the concern, and try and enact support systems around that to bring equality and accountability to the police forces. So this is to me, it's a longer conversation to get this right, to get it perfect, but I support the concept.
I think you're right. I think most of these things do involve conversation, which is why this very conversation is important, because we have to start somewhere, and we keep putting those ideas out there, and pushing until we, see happen that would actually affect that change that we're looking for, or that our communities are looking for specifically. All right. Did anyone have any further thoughts on the community oversight? Can we move on to the next question?
No, I just hope it doesn't lose traction. You know, so many of these things throughout the protests and anger since the 60s, right? Even before that. It flares, it dies, and everybody goes back to life, and the conversations don't continue. So it's going to be on people like Marcus, the city of Elgin, myself, to continue having these conversations without hesitation, and do it in a hasteful manner.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's definitely important to keep the conversations going.
Yeah, and then it's also important to have action behind conversations. You don't have conversations for so long before people start feeling like, you're just playing with their emotions. And then these oversights, they have to have real power, right? No dog and pony show, because there's plenty of cities that are like, oh, look, we put together a citizen review board, and they'll throw it up there, has no power, has really no real oversight, but they'll say, look what we've done, and pat ourselves on the back. And we're not going to stand for that. It's got to be real. It's got to have some authority. It's got to have some power. Whatever negotiations going on with the unions, this stuff needs to be in the contract, as part of those negotiations, in order for them to get their raises and all of the benefits that we pay as citizens. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I say again, who gets to go to work and tell their boss how they can discipline them, or tell their job how you can discipline me? Like, it's completely backwards. I just think law enforcement got to the point where they forgot that they work for us. They forgot to serve us, and that's important. And that's one of the things that me and Ron have talked about in the past, and that's why we have such a good friendship, is that he understands the serve part, right? To serve the forgotten, right? And then that's when the change begins to happen, when they can get back to the serve.
Yep, that is really important to keep in mind, that action is necessary, not only conversations. I appreciate that. And feeding off the discussion about accountability, our next question is somewhat related, and that is legislation that was signed into law following the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. Legislation was put in place in Illinois. Put in place policies being called for around the country right now, including the creation of a system for the use of body cams in Illinois, prohibition of the use of chokeholds, and the creation of a database for officers who are fired or resigned due to misconduct. So those things were already included in this legislation. However, one piece that was dropped from that legislation in order to get it passed was the licensing of police. Right now, Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul is renewing his call for licensing of police to be put in place as a measure that would allow the state to pull licenses from officers for repeated misconduct or egregious misconduct, preventing them from continuing to work in the profession elsewhere in the state. I'd love to hear both of your thoughts about the idea of licensing officers.
Yeah, so I'll jump in on that. So I'm really proud. I got to hit on the body cams real quick. So we've been working for the better part of 2020. Obviously, as a government entity, we have to go through an RFP system to get quotes to decide on a system to purchase. We've been working on a body-worn camera and a new squad dash cam platform for all of our cars and all of our deputies and officers. Again, since January of this year, and we just got it passed through the first county board committee last week to get body-worn cameras finally at the sheriff's office. So I'm really excited about that. The staff was really receptive to it, and I couldn't be more proud of their openness to their own accountability to have the BWCs and the dash cams. Moving on to the licensing, so I point to, if you haven't noticed in a lot of the things I cite, I point to personal experience. And we can talk about the Delnor hostage incident, which most people in Kane County are aware of. And it involved a corrections officer who was hired 18 years before that incident, went through initial training, and our agency did not do a great deal, if any, additional training to support his work as a police or as a correctional officer. So we send him forward with a badge and a gun and just expect him to operate effectively. Where a licensing option would mandate that police officers go through some sort of curriculum on perhaps an annual basis or every 2 years to maintain their certification, just like doctors do, chiropractors do, heck, even barbers do it. So why should we not be held to a licensing criteria? So considering all of that we need to stay up on our game and we need to show, we need to prove to our community and the state that we deserve to maintain our certification as a police officer. I'm a proponent.
Marcus, what do you think about the idea of licensing officers?
Well, I want to address something that he talked about, body cams and whatnot. So as you know that some places already have body cameras in place as part of policy. There needs to be a particular way that these body cameras are fixed to the bodies of these officers, because some of them take them and they just clip them on like a garage door opener, and then the first time they run, there goes the body camera, right? So that kind of defeats the purpose. When there's other ways that it can be secured, where they can, if they have to wrestle with somebody, if they tackle somebody, or if they're chasing somebody, that these body cameras aren't flying off. Because I think with the way that they're made and allowing the officers to wear them how they want to, backdoor the system itself by just placing it in a position where all they have to do is jump out of the car and there goes the body camera. So when they're asked for it, oh, it fell off. It shouldn't fall off. There's ways to secure it and zip it in and make it where it won't go anywhere. So as policy, that's something else that we're going to have to address with the city of Elgin. It should be secured where it won't move, it won't go anywhere. That is possible.
Mm-hmm.
So Marcus, are you saying that you feel like officers intentionally don't secure it properly, or you feel like it's a design flaw in the camera system?
Because some officers wear them a certain way and other officers wear them a different way. So I've seen it, and there's been incidents where we needed to look at some body cam on an incident with some citizens, and something happened, and the body cam fell off into a puddle of water. But it was like just like that. So it's like, yeah, that shouldn't happen, right? It shouldn't even be a option for it to just fall off.
And so does the Elgin body camera policy, does it state that it has to be secured in a specific fashion?
I don't think so. But we'll dig into that. That's something that we're going to be addressing. And like I said, because of what
that's an important answer to get. I just, again, being a police officer in this community for 22 years, I have a very hard time believing that an officer would intentionally loosely secure that body camera just to avoid some sort of video capturing. But I'm going to defer to your final review.
Yeah, and then you know they also turn them off when it's convenient for them as well. So if they'll turn them off, why wouldn't they put them in a position for it to fly off?
Yeah, if they're turning it off, that's usually a policy violation. We just disciplined 2 deputies here at the sheriff's office, gave them multiple days off and suspension for muting their microphone. So yeah, that should be a severe policy violation.
Right. So
every incident's different.
Yeah. So now if they're being held accountable for messing with the camera, well, then this is another option for them not to have to be held accountable because it's a malfunction and it wasn't something they did intentionally.
Sure.
Okay. So to the licensing, yeah, most definitely, 100% in favor of that. As long as it's got a physical criteria and everything wrapped up inside of it, outside of just the studying and taking the test, because I think what causes a lot of officers to react and respond with the weapons is they don't have the confidence or the courage to think that they can handle somebody physically. And it's something, I'm against guns. Period. I don't like guns because I think they turn incident that could have been bumps and bruises into murder and something like that. So I always encourage people never to carry guns, because if something happens instinctively as a person, if it's not going your way, they're gonna reach for whatever they got and start shooting in that moment of fight or flight. So the physical portion of that has to be included in that certification. You have to be able to pass physical training. And I think more law enforcement should spend time getting punched in the face and physical combat, so that they're not afraid of it when they have to do it.
So is that a segue into our boxing match announcement that we got coming up in September? No, we'll save that for the end. But no, I thank you for pointing that out, Marcus, because we're very proud of a division that we created at the Sheriff's Office a year and a half ago called the Tactical Training Unit. Essentially, instead of deputies training only quarterly or 2 or 3 times a year, they have to train for about 2 hours a month in de-escalation training, stress-induced firearms training, and then defensive tactics as part of that as well. So again, Marcus, you're absolutely right, and you have to have your skills sharpened on a regular basis. So when you do get in an actual confrontation, you know how to operate, and you don't just automatically advance to the most aggressive use of force. And because of that, we enjoy great statistics here at the Sheriff's Office and the most minimal amount of force necessary to effect an arrest.
Speaking of that, and Ron, you could answer the question, what types of oversight do we have in place in King County for officers?
So I'll speak specifically to the Sheriff's Office, and most agencies like Elgin and Aurora reflect the same. So we have an Office of Professional Standards. And so the Office of Professional Standards, they are personnel from our own agency. They do review every use of force incident. They do review policy violations. We rely on our supervisors to regularly review their own shifts camera video, just to ensure, and it's spot checking. It's obviously not a review of all of it, but it's spot checking activity on traffic stops, on calls, to ensure that our policies are being followed. If there is officer-involved death, that is reviewed by the Major Crimes Task Force in Kane County, which is overseen by our state's attorney. So I know there are calls for, again, to Marcus's point, for independent reviews of those incidents, whether it be that the policy violations in-house. I can understand that, and I could align with that if properly done. And there is a call for, and Marcus, I apologize, I don't know if this is on your plate or not, but a call for these use of force or officer-involved deaths or any extreme uses of force to be investigated by an outside state's attorney's office, the Illinois Attorney General. I think that's a splendid idea, because you're moving it out of the venue and giving it some independent eyes.
I've seen some mixed commentary on those ideas, so it's interesting to hear your view of it. All right,
address some of that Office of Professional Standards. So the problem with that is we got friends investigating friends. Most of the time, somebody who's already been on the police force for 20, 30 years, worked with all of these guys. And I can speak directly to when a citizen comes in to put in a complaint at these offices, they're greeted with hostility from the officer that's supposed to be investigating this. Mm-hmm. And they're already defending the officer before an investigation even begins. So, I mean, that in itself lets you know that before you even do the investigation, you're already done picked apart whatever the complaint is about the officer, and you already defended him. So that's why it discourages citizens from coming in and putting in complaints anyways. So I don't think anybody from law enforcement should be in that position. I think it should be somebody maybe retired military who's about order, discipline, who have no friendships, no ties to anybody from law enforcement or within the departments. And that's the only way to truly get a fresh set of eyes on it, who's looking at both sides objectively, instead of, like I said, coming in, defending the officer before the investigation even begins.
Yeah, and I'll give the tit for tat to that, Marcus, in that we see it the other side where somebody had a grudge 15 years ago with another officer, and now they're in that professional standards division, and they have a weighted view of that officer's activity. So you don't get that impartiality. So we've actually been talking. We're looking at hiring a civilian position that would be that retired, FBI agent who's familiar with these type of investigations, or retired Department of Corrections investigator who could handle these types of cases with that objective view. So you're absolutely right. There's not impartiality right now.
That makes sense for your input on both perspectives there. Next question we have, our Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton has been vocal about the call to remove police from schools. As a legislator, she helped pass legislation to remove booking stations from schools, and now she wants to see all police removed from schools and replaced with increased presence of mental health workers. What are your respective thoughts on policing in schools?
So we do have 2 school resource officers here at the Sheriff's Office. They serve at Keeneland High School and Burlington High School, which probably represent far different demographics than CPS schools and even Elgin and Aurora schools do. So our deputies are able to have a much more friendly relationship with students. They still handle a tremendous call volume on a daily basis within the schools. Mostly they focus on networking with school administrators and handling discipline in that route. But unfortunately, in this day and age, they're still recovering a fair amount of drug evidence, drugs being used in the bathrooms of schools, possessed in lockers. But again, our emphasis is not on criminal charges. It's on getting them support. We actually, at the Sheriff's Office, we pay for Lighthouse Recovery, who does our jail recovery program. In addiction counseling, we pay for them to be at Keeneland High School to do that same support to those kids. So they're probably, and again, I can't speak to what it's like to police in a school in Chicago or even police in Chicago. It's a different environment than most of Kane County. But for us, in rural Kane, it's a supportive atmosphere, and I would hate to see a broad sweeping brush that eliminates that support system.
Marcus, do you agree?
Well, I think that they shouldn't be, law enforcement should not be involved in the disciplinary of our children. And with my experience with law enforcement, there's a trigger that goes off in there where they get straight on enforcement, and that they're not able to separate the human portion of it, that they're dealing with a kid. That's how you end up with the 6-year-old going to jail. That's how you end up with 15-year-old girls getting slammed on their face by a man, because they get to the point where a God complex kicks in, and they're on that enforcement. Okay, you're yelling at me. That's disorderly conduct. I'm taking you to jail. And now they don't see a kid there anymore. Now they see this criminal. Now they see the enemy, and then they deal with them as such. And a lot of times, some of the things that are going on with these kids is internal. And having law enforcement present, you're dealing with surface issues as opposed to dealing with the root issue. So if you get more people to deal with the mental health and emotional trauma that these kids are going through, then they wouldn't have as many problems as opposed to law enforcement getting involved and then charging these kids with cases. I speak passionately about that because I was one of those young kids. I had a lot of emotional problems. I had an abusive stepfather. I went to all kinds of things. I was an angry kid, and I acted out at school, and I got in trouble at school. But there were no police officers there, but they had the teachers, the BD teachers, and there were times where she would have to sit on me and make me calm down, and I love her to this day. Her name's Paula Drews. And I credit her with my education and my knowledge, because she always challenged me to go to the next level. So when I was in 5th and 6th grade, she was teaching me 8th, 9th, 10th grade work because she knew I had the capacity for it. But had there been officers in that school, they probably would have arrested me for assault or something, silly like that. Because all they're worried about is enforcement, enforcement. So I don't think they should be in the schools. Definitely in favor of having more mental health and emotional social workers. But depending on what area it is, you have to have people who look like these kids. Because I also didn't relate to the counselors that they had me talking to. I would look at them like, you don't know my life. So you got to have people who look like the Latinos, who look like the Black kids, in order to be able to connect with them and work through the root instead of.
So again, Marcus, I don't think we can paint with that broad sweeping brush because it all comes down to philosophy of the policing agency. So in modern training as well, right? So we have excellent school resource officer training that the officers have to attend on an annual basis. We have agreements with the school districts in place and how they're going to work hand in hand with our deputies. And it's all about diversion. It's not about punishment.
Can I ask a question, Ron?
As long as those students look like that officer, what happens when those students start looking a little different? Like I said, that perception, you can't bring that out of somebody, whatever they've been through their childhood traumas, dealing with people of color, or maybe they hear their father at home speaking a certain way about people of color, or they saw something on TV. That sticks with somebody. And when they start dealing with those kids, a lot of our kids don't get officer friendly. We get officer knee on the back of our necks.
I don't think you and I look the same, but you and I, at the end of the day, always come to terms and have a good understanding of each other and each other's backgrounds as well. We didn't grow up the same way, but we know how to communicate with each other in a productive fashion.
We're special type of men. Not everybody's built like us, Ron.
Fair enough. Very true, but it comes from the leadership down. Martha, I know you got a question.
Yes, I have a question for you. As a mom, do the school resource officers, do they carry guns, or are they carrying tasers? They are carrying guns?
They are carrying the last administration at the sheriff's office made them go from soft clothes, plain clothes, still a badge and a gun and handcuffs on their hip, to a uniform presence in the schools. I'm still debating how I feel about that. I do like the softer appearance within the schools, but we also have to remember we've been talking about COVID for the last 3 months. We've been talking about George Floyd and all the other racial issues surrounding law enforcement for the past couple of weeks. We forgot about the active shooters that we were all enraged about before that, and we've had a hiatus in active shootings for the better part of the last 4 months because everybody's been quarantined. But that is a real and present threat in all of our schools, and that gives a lot of our school administrators some peace of mind to have active law enforcement inside their doors.
Right. I mean, they haven't necessarily stopped those happening before, but I do understand as a country we're in a catch-22 as far as that goes. So it is again a discussion that I think is worth digging into deeper, and I appreciate the different viewpoints here.
Well, they also have situations where officers in the school they're tasing our kids with tasers because the kid is upset and agitated, right? Because they don't know how to handle them. And then when it's a person of color, all they see is a threat and they want to neutralize the threat. The minute the kid raises his voice or has a temper tantrum, the officer all of a sudden feels like he needs to shoot something or do something physical to that child. And that's why I'm against them being in. But if it's my child, I'm gonna be highly upset.
Yeah, I totally understand that concern, and I think it's valid. Concerned about that. I do have, I think I have at least one more question here, and I know I don't want to take too much of anybody's time tonight. The next question is with regards to gang databases. So gang databases have been accused of being error-prone tools for criminalizing communities of color, with access often not limited to law enforcement and a lack of transparency as to how the databases are compiled. Advocates for reform say that the history of these databases is the history of systemic racism. Some have called for total removal of gang databases, while others recommend more transparency and a limit to how long a person's name stays on the list. What are your thoughts on this?
You want me to go, Marcus?
You want to go first? I definitely got something to say, so go ahead.
You and I are probably going to be in lockstep on this one for the most part. So this is the only part you might disagree with. So law enforcement, of course, has many different databases that they use for intelligence, and a gang database is just one of them. But yeah, it's, in my opinion, incredibly flawed. It's not very transparent. And I'll reach back to my own examples. People ask me street side, hey, Deputy Hain at the time, Sergeant Hain, Sheriff Hain, whatever, how do I get myself out of the gang database? Well, you have to petition the agency that entered you into the gang database. Well, who entered me? Well, that's in our leads computer system, and it would be a violation of leads for me to release that information to a person in the public. So it's difficult for law enforcement to be able to answer that question and give people a direct response. So
I think this is the point we're supposed to call them names.
I think so. I think we get your answer now while Ron jumps back in.
All right. Well, I understand the database is necessary for active people, but comes a point where boys become men, boys become fathers, boys become productive citizens in our society. And the way our system is set up is once you're labeled for life. You know, whether they want to label you a criminal, whether they want to label you a gangbanger, and it just follows you for the rest of your life. So we're going to talk about this gang database. We also have to talk about our Second Amendment rights that people have taken away for life based on being convicted of a felony, whether it was a nonviolent offense or not. In some states, people are disenfranchised from voting for life because they were because they were convicted of a felon. So all of these databases go hand in hand, whether it's the gang, whether it's you were a convicted felon. You know, it's like, at what point do I become a full-fledged citizen again, right? And if I'm not a full-fledged citizen, then I shouldn't have to pay taxes either. That's my thought.
That's an interesting thought. I like that.
can I talk about Marcus paying taxes? No, sorry, I have to apologize for my IT issues. Yeah, there has to be much better accountability on every single law enforcement agency's gang database and how long the records are being kept for. And there has to be a petition process. It has to be a really simple petition process. Essentially, prove to me, after you entered me in there and I was involved in crime X, Y, and Z 15 years ago, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, what sort of activity am I involved in now that warrants that tag on my name?
And then they also got to have a real criteria for putting people on this list. So it's been proven that they'll put people on this list. So say they have me classified as a gang member and they see me and Ron talking. Well, now Ron's classified as a gang member and he's never been a part of a gang. And I can show real life instances where guys were entered into the database and I know they've never been a gang member a day in their life. Or you have incidents where guys were a part of one gang, but they hung out with their rival gang members all the time. So they have mislabeled in the system as being a part of a gang that they're not even a part of. So the way they go about it is very flawed. Something as simple as seeing a picture of you with your head turned to the side. Maybe you were wrestling and your head got knocked to the side and somebody snapped the picture. But they would take that and say, okay, well, he's a gang member. He's around this person. His head is turned to the side. So we'll just label him as a gang member. Now, this is very dangerous because law enforcement gets a hit that you're armed and dangerous, approach with caution, right? And then you have men. Myself personally, I've been in situations where I'm pulled over and my children are in the back seat and an officer is approaching my car with his hand on his gun to the point where I'm like, I roll my windows down. Like, when you look in my back seat and see my children there, before he ever even talked to me, he's already reaching for his gun. This was going through South Elgin years ago, though. So you're creating a dangerous situation, not only for the individual, but then also for the innocent children riding in the back seat of the vehicle.
So, Marcus, let me ask you this. There is a stacked criteria on paper for you to be entered as a, sorry for the dog, be entered as a gang crime member. And that's, so that's, you're in contact
He's calling BS, whatever you're about to say, man. He's calling BS.
You're in contact with a gang member 3 different times during police encounters. You are seen wearing gang colors multiple different times. And remember where this is all derived from. This is all derived from the 80s and 90s gang epidemic, and that system's still in place today. So, a system that was used 30, 40 years ago doesn't really have much application now, perhaps, and definitely needs some revolutionizing and reform.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sorry, I was going to ask you a question. I got distracted by my dog. So if you were involved in, let's say, a mob action incident with somebody else who's listed as a gang member, if you admitted to being involved in a gang, would you not be open to, but would you agree that that person could be entered into a gang database for a certain period of time?
Yeah, well, wait.
Mark?
What you missed when you were left was that I understand the need of the gang database. I'm not saying that it shouldn't exist.
Okay.
It definitely needs to be monitored differently and work differently. Like I said, because like when boys become men and fathers, it's a whole different ball game. And just as easy as you can be added to a list, like there should be a criteria for redemption, right? And that's the same thing I was telling her. At what path can I travel to where I'm 100% full-fledged citizen again, even though I committed a crime as a young man, I was convicted of a felon, I was a gang member. When does this go away? 20 years later, it still shouldn't be a fact. I still shouldn't have to not have my Second Amendment rights for something that I did when I was 19 years old. Now I'm a grown man with a family, and I can't protect my home because of something I did when I was a kid. And then in some states, they lose their right to vote, disenfranchised for life from being convicted of a felon. So those things are a problem, and that whole thing, all of those systems, need to be overall.
All right. So just wrapping up our discussion, I want to thank both of you again for the insights that you've shared, for your time, for your commitment to improving our community for all people. I also wanted to point out, we lost Ron. I also did want to point out that it is the eve of Juneteenth today. And Juneteenth, for anyone who is not aware, is the celebration of the end of slavery. And I'm hopeful on this Juneteenth that with everything going on, we will have more things to celebrate in our country, more positive action, more moving forward that we need to see. So the last question that I have, I think, is a fitting one for us to end with, and that is, where do you find hope in these uncertain times to move forward? And I'm going to give my answer first, so you can't take it. I have to say, honestly, that I find a lot of hope right now in the young people who are showing up and leading the way, organizing rallies, speaking up, and recognizing the power that they have. So talking a lot about the importance of voting. I think young people are becoming more aware, but they're also showing the way and getting involved in leading. So I'm curious where the two of you hope these days and everything going on.
Marcus?
I'll bring up the rear. I'll bring
Okay.
up the rear.
Okay. So I'm going to use a word that Marcus and I use all the time, and it's between each other and in the public, and it's action. So that's what gives me hope. And the fact that, since I took over as sheriff, we invested in relationships inside of our jail. It wasn't, we put it out on social media, just to raise awareness about what was going on, humanizing the incarcerated, if you will, which is an event that I began hosting right before COVID kind of curtailed those. But the community in a lot of our low-income areas, Elgin, Aurora, Carpentersville, didn't become aware of this because they saw it on the news and they saw it on social media. They became aware of it because their own family members or friends who were incarcerated said, hold on, this sheriff, these programs, these officers is like nothing we've seen before. We're in a new environment. Because of that, spread out into the community, because it spread out into the streets, my sheriff's deputies tell me regularly that they have different encounters with people in the community, in the minority community, improved encounters because of our renewed investment in those marginalized people. And I think Kane County sets a great example for any community in the nation. Where if we can do it here, if we can lead real change and return people to the community with a helping hand, when we have people that walk out of our jail, I always talk about Charles Taylor, the 70-year-old black man from Aurora who was in and out of custody 12 times in his life. And he said when he left our recovery pod, he's like, Sheriff Hain, because you're in here all the time, because your officers are leading these programs, because they treat me like a person. I never realized in my 50 years of police contact and arrests and charges and sentences that anybody in uniform ever actually cared about me. Charles Taylor is my motivation every day, and so many other men that I advocate for on a regular basis. So that gives me hope, and it's not so much hope as it is drive. It's charge. It's keep pressing no matter how many people try and shoot you down, how many people try and pull the rug out from you, how many prosecutors don't like what you do because it's different, how many police officers get upset and think that you're just advocating for a criminal. No, this is how we avoid events like we had in Aurora 2 weeks ago. This is how we get in front of a large group of people like, I'll do what you do, Marcus, people that look like Marcus and people that look like me and say, hey, look, we can do this unity hand-holding nonsense and all this feel-good talk, or we can actually come together and drive real change. That's what has to happen. And people that wear the uniform and the badge have to look at life a little bit differently, have to look at their job a little bit differently, and be that change on a daily basis.
Got to be the change you want to see. So I'll just piggyback off of that. Yeah, that definitely, it gives me hope and it inspires me that we have somebody like Ron Hain in the position that he's in, and the fact that he actually has the courage to think outside of the box, listen to the flip side, and in a lot of cases.
Oh no,
Did we lose him?
I think we did.
So I finally get my own platform now. He got to talk a couple of times for that.
He did, but I think he's coming back.
Okay.
Go ahead.
But when he comes back on, I have a pretty good idea what Marcus is going to say, and his frustration is really going to be evolved around, again, that lack of momentum, right? That this charge, this group activism is going to fall off into whatever's told to us to pay attention to next, right? Whether it's COVID-20, whether it's Godzilla, who knows? It's been such a strange 2020 so far. But, to Marcus's activism and what he's done, is he back? He's back. I was speaking for you. I was putting words in your mouth. But I'll let you take over.
Yeah, so I was saying is that, he has the courage to actually get out there and go against the grain. So as I tell all law enforcement, you want to work with the community. What's your give, right? You want the community to trust you. You want the community to work with you. You want the community to accept the programming, the social programs that you have. But what's your give? So in Ron's case, his give was, he was campaigning. He helped me link some guys up with some training, which actually, Valero, actually, he's working as a truck driver right now, in case you didn't know that, Ron.
Wonderful.
But guys get training and connect them with people who are willing to work with them, that could lead to them getting jobs that are middle class, where they can actually have gainful employment. So like I said, that definitely inspires me to moving forward and having these types of relationships where he understands that his work that he's doing there in the county jail is connected to the work that somebody like me is doing in the community, and to actually bridge that gap and connect it. So as people leave the county jail, they don't just come out here and they're like, oh, well, what do I do? Well, they come see me and other guys like me, get connected to the resources, get connected to the job opportunities, right? And then it's the follow through, right? Action and follow through. Those are the most important things. A lot of agencies and politicians, right? They get started with things and they like to take pictures and put on the dog and pony show. But then what about that when the cameras go off and all the lights go off, right? And this person's feeling suicidal at 4 o'clock in the morning. Where's the follow through, right? Well, who's going to still be there? And it's going to be somebody like me. So are you building relationships in order to help community advocates to continue to do the work that you claim to have a heart for? If you're not doing that, as a politician or anybody in a position of authority that says they want to help the community, then it's all for pretend. It's not real, and we won't accept it.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that. And I definitely appreciate both of you and all your time and everything that you're doing in the community. And I hope that we can stay in touch and in communication and work together to see some action.
Yeah, we got some,
Oh, and yeah, we've got some action coming up, right?
Can we do 2 plugs? So
Sure.
my first plug, so I got a podcast that's going to be coming out in about 2-3 weeks. It's called The Sheriff and His Inmates. So hopefully people pay attention, take a look out for that. We'll put it on social media when it's live. And then Marcus, what's coming up? What else we got going on?
So I'm the president of a non-profit organization called Our Neighborhoods Empowered. We opened up a fitness center called One Fitness Center where we do boxing, Muay Thai, jiu-jitsu, weight training. We also have a computer center there where we teach computer coding, app development, 3D printing design, and print. One of the things that we do there is my nephew started in the backyard called Hands Up, Guns Down, where him and his friends challenge each other to fight and settle their differences in boxing gloves and not be in the streets picking up guns and things like that. So they started in the backyard, and then eventually, we started getting in the gym, and then we finally opened our own gym. So what's going to happen is in September, we haven't picked a date yet, but sometime in September, Sheriff Ron Hain and myself are going to fight on this Hands Up, Guns Down movement fight card at the main event. This is to let people know and see that when law enforcement agencies and community advocates come together to same common causes, that the things that we can accomplish are limitless and without boundaries. So we're fighting against gun violence. We're fighting against recidivism and just the overall public safety as a whole that we all care about as community members. So it's going to be a live fight.
Is this the part where I talk trash to you and then I throw the chair over that I'm sitting in and walk out?
This is the part where I'm really glad that we're doing this remotely.
Yeah, no, it's all good. All right, thanks, Martha. I appreciate you having me on.
Thanks to both of you.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Get in the gym, Sheriff. I'm going to see you soon.
Yes, sir. See you soon.